We are back on the Zero Hour. We are happy to welcome back our good friend Rebecca Vallas back on the program. She is the Director of Policy for the Poverty to Prosperity program at the Center for American Progress, and she is the host of Talk Poverty on the We Act Radio Network right here on We Act Radio. Rebecca, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thanks for having me on, as always. It's a pleasure. How you doing, RJ?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm a little tired, but I'm hanging in there.
Yeah, you've been on the Great North American Tour or something. You're on the road, huh?
It's been a heck of a week, but it always feels like home on the Zero Hour.
And home it is. My house is your house. And I have to say, before we get started, that you have one of the hardest titles to say fast of anybody I know. Director of Policy for the Poverty to Prosperity program. That's a mouthful.
It's a test, actually. Yeah, no, it's a test just to see what an expert radio host you are, but you nailed it. You did.
Yeah, and it's also going to be a test like I can't start my car because the interlock system won't work unless I can pronounce those words. It's going to be a So anyway, listen, you said you had quite a week. I hear you appeared before the House Budget Committee.
That is correct. Chairman Price held a hearing on Wednesday of this week, and he actually, it was a little bit of a gimmick. He lined up a bunch of millennials, of which I was one. Yes, I am being outed as a millennial today by saying that. And the goal of the hearing was really to try to pit young people against seniors and to perpetuate the sort of false choice narrative that we can't afford Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid because we're stealing from young people. And I think anyone who watched the hearing hopefully was not persuaded because a lot of facts, inconvenient though they might have been for Chairman Price, came to light.
So this was an attempt to push the old generation war meme, the greedy geezers, and it was called something like, I'm trying to remember, like restoring trust for millennials, a little play on the word trust fund because you can't trust those old people not to steal your money, right?
That's right. He called it restoring the trust for young Americans, and restoring the trust has been his little mantra. It's actually the tagline he used for the fiscal year 2016 House budget proposal, which does the opposite of restore the trust for anyone who is not wealthy or a large corporation.
Now, why can't we trust, speaking of restoring trust, why can't we trust what people like Chairman Price say about Social Security? What was he peddling? I mean, you and I have heard the spiel before, but what was he trying to say this time around? That the money's going to be gone and it won't be there for you millennials when it gets there? Was that his whole argument?
Also, the whole really kind of misleading and false narrative that somehow if we spend $1 on a program that's, one of our bedrock social insurance programs like Social Security or Medicare, that's $1 fewer to spend on young people, as though it's a zero-sum game. And the thing that I raised several times in the hearing, that Ranking Member Van Hollen raised and others, and which the Republicans would really have you not know, is that it's only a zero-sum game if we box ourselves in to only being able to find savings on the spending cut side, as opposed to actually looking at having the wealthy pay their fair share. We've got a Congress where literally half of Congress, literally an entire political party, has all signed Grover Norquist's no tax pledge, and they, as a result, will not consider closing a single tax loophole or looking at a single tax break that goes to the wealthiest Americans or to major corporations. And as a result, what they're trying to do is to say, we have to close our long-term deficits, we have to balance the budget, and there's only one place we can look, and that is the spending side. And now that they've squeezed as much blood out of the turnip as there was to start when it comes to discretionary spending on, key investments like Pell Grants, education, job training, food stamps, and such. They now have shifted to saying, well, we've run out of cuts there, so you know what? We're going to have to look to those pesky entitlements, what they like to call our social insurance programs, and find more cuts there. But
and of course, the big problem.
Only...
Yeah, and if I just jump in for a second, Rebecca, we're talking to Rebecca Vallas, Director of Policy for the Poverty to Prosperity Program at the Center for American Progress. How is that? The problem, of course, there is that they're talking about reducing the deficit as if Social Security, for one, contributed to the deficit, which, as you know, and I know, it is forbidden to do by law.
That's exactly right. And that's one of those talking points that is very fact-free. Oh, Social Security is driving the deficit. It's driving the debt. By law, it cannot add a penny to the deficit or to the debt, something that they would rather us not know. But, moreover, by focusing only on a sort of an exaggerated and hyperbolic, oh my God, the sky is falling view of Social Security's modest, long-expected, projected 75-year shortfall, what they're ignoring is that we know exactly what we can do and we know what would be fair, and that's to have wealthy Americans pay their fair share by lifting or eliminating outright the payroll tax cap that has slipped over the years. I actually mentioned at one point during the hearing that it was President Reagan himself who set that payroll tax cap at 90% of covered wages in this country. It slipped because the rich have gotten richer. And we've got more and more millionaires and billionaires having their wages escape that payroll tax cap, and they stop paying into Social Security just a couple days into the year, while the rest of us pay all year long. That's an easy and fair and simple fix that the American people widely agree across political parties, across income levels, across generations is the right thing to do. And yet we have this huge disconnect between what the American people say they want and what makes sense and what we hear folks in Congress talking about.
And Rebecca Vallas, when we say that, and when you say that the American people across the political spectrum strongly agree, I think we're talking, I'm trying to retrieve the numbers from my internal hard drive. I think we're talking about something on the order of 74% of Republicans support the idea. Well, this is not just an 80-something% of Democrats and equivalent number of independents. I mean, this is overwhelmingly Americans want to see this payroll tax cap adjusted or lifted so that multimillionaires and billionaires are paying in at roughly the same rate as most Americans, right?
That's exactly right. And yet, for some reason, we have one political party in Congress not even listening to their own base on this, and really instead, I think, listening to the donor class, which is that top share of really ultra wealthy people in this country who are the ones who maybe don't agree with the rest of Americans. And
maybe, just maybe, now I'm going to speculate a little bit here, Rebecca Vallas, but maybe, just maybe, they don't agree because they're the only ones who would be affected by it, by having to pay, for once, their fair share into the Social Security system, and maybe, just maybe, they don't want to do that.
I would not say that is a too much of a leap to make. I think that's a fair speculation, RJ.
All right. Now I also understand you had an exchange with somebody, who I had almost forgotten existed. I'm speaking of Mark Sanford, the former governor who was famous for metaphorically hiking the Appalachian Trail with his girlfriend while married, and is now in the House. I'd almost forgotten that, and I understand you had a little back and forth with him.
Happy with me after it.
What was that? You dropped out for a second there.
I don't think he was very happy with me after that exchange, no.
Well, tell us about it.
As I said, I was doing my part to bring inconvenient facts to bear, to really bust that, narrative that it's a false choice in what we can afford to spend on in this country. And several of the congressional Republicans who were in attendance at the hearing were not huge fans of my continuing to bring up those pesky facts. Representative Sanford was one of them. He brought up the Bowles-Simpson report. And it was unfortunate for him that he did that, because I used that moment to remind him and his colleagues that if we want to look back to the Bowles-Simpson Commission, we will find that they called for reducing our deficit on the order of $1.7 trillion in discretionary spending cuts, and that if you use the same baseline budget projections that they did, we've already exceeded those targets. So there's really no reason to continue pretending the sky is falling and that we've got these huge crushing deficits that are going to cause economic doom for our country. The reality is we've already exceeded those targets, and now at this point we need to be avoiding further misguided austerity that really comes at the expense of economic growth and Americans' well-being. He didn't like that very much.
And then time was up and he couldn't respond to you?
That's exactly what happened, and Chairman Price cut him off, and the video is actually worth watching.
No, I will watch it now. Rebecca Vallas, I have to ask you just a personal question, which is, when you were having this exchange with him, were you thinking to yourself, that's the Appalachian Trail guy?
The entire time, and it was all I could do not to get the verb hike into anything I was saying. I thought a lot about it, and somehow my super ego, maybe overruled my id.
Well, good for you. I mean, I'm glad you kept it. You stuck to the high road, or is that too close to? But I'm glad. I'm glad you took the path not taken. I'm sorry, I don't know how to express it, but I'm glad you did the right thing. Now, so in conclusion, I guess I would ask you: Did you learn anything from this budget committee? I mean, have they changed their tactics, or are they still peddling the same old, or are they coming up with new ways to try to defend the interests of their big donors on this topic?
You know, they might have come up with softer sounding, more compassionate sounding rhetoric in some cases, but it's still the same old policies. I will say the exception to that in terms of nicer rhetoric was there was another witness. She was a 19-year-old state legislator from West Virginia. She was actually elected when she was 17, so we heard about how she couldn't even vote for herself in the primary. And she was there speaking about her views on the budget and bedrock social insurance programs. And there was a moment of just such incredible honesty. You almost never hear from Republican elected officials that what they really want to do is slash Social Security. You hear words like reform, you hear words like save, and yet when she was asked, what do you want to do about Social Security, she said, I want to slash it. And it was this amazing moment of just like brazen honesty. Yep, that's what they want to do.
She hasn't been to the dissembling classes yet, the Keep It Secret. Last question for you, Rebecca Vallas, Director of Policy for the Poverty to Prosperity Program at the Center for American Progress. I'm getting good at that. Last question for you. Have you ever noticed that when they try to pit millennials against boomers, they always propose policies that don't hurt boomers and do hurt millennials?
I actually made almost that exact point a couple of times at the hearing. And I think that the fiscal year 2016 House budget is just Exhibit A of that exact observation. They slash healthcare spending for seniors, and they don't take those, quote, savings and then reinvest them in young people. What they do is they slash Pell Grants and education and job training and nutrition assistance and the American Opportunity Tax Credit and everything under the sun that is exactly what we would need if we want to, quote, restore the trust for young Americans. And yet that is exactly the narrative that they sell. It's, we need to cut these programs so we can do more for you. Well, we need to, as a generation, wise up and really see what they're after and notice that it's not about trying to help us. It's about trying to con us.
Absolutely. I couldn't put it better, and so we'll have to end it there. Rebecca Vallas has some job at Center for American Progress. I'm not going to try to say it anymore. And as always, Rebecca, great to talk to you, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, RJ. I look forward to coming back.
You bet.